So you can see it now. The first slide shows a beautiful picture of our planet Earth, taken by the NASA Apollo program. I think it's the Apollo 17. And I gave you a quote here by Martin Rees. There is no plan B for Earth, no viable alternative within reach if we do not care for our home planet. Martin Rees is the British astronomer. He is now based at Cambridge University, and he is a fellow of the Trinity College. He was appointed by the Queen in 2005 to be in the House of Lords. And he wrote a book, the first book, entitled Our Final Century, which is about the humanity footprint on the global environment. So let me go into my subject of tonight's presentation. So tonight we talked about the 4 kinds of nutriments. In the sutra I sent you prior to our discussion this evening, the sutra was about the Buddha taught of 4 kinds of nutriments, and they are edible food, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. As you already saw in the sutra, in his teaching, the Buddha used very strong images to illustrate the consumption of these nutriments. Personally, I found those images terrifying. I cannot visualize myself eating edible food as if I consumed the flesh of my own child. Those are very strong images. So this evening I am not going to analyzing those contemplations, but instead I will rather emphasize on how we should look at the consumption of the 4 foods in order to preserve our health while protecting our environment. Environment here means human beings and all other species, as well as the nature around us. Let's go to the next slide. So for me, the best way to look at the edible food is to re-examine the 5 contemplations before eating, written by Thầy and the Plum Village Sangha. The 5 contemplation here is in its new version. Remind us to eat in such a way to stop contributing to climate change and to preserve our precious planet. So this in itself is a big subject, a big concern. We are not eating just for ourselves, but we should look deeply into the interrelatedness, the interbeing of the food we consume. The 5 contemplations possess really all the ingredients we need to develop what I call a roadmap guiding our eating. And we can see in the first contemplation, it shows the interdependent character of the food, as food relies on the earth, the sky, and all beings, and hard work to come to our plate. This contemplation in itself is a wake-up call for us to take care of our planet, because taking care of our planet is also taking care of ourselves, based on the interrelatedness, interbeing of all things. And we go to the next one. We don't need Mademoiselle Nathalie Lassin to tell us that no water, no life. We all know that water is an essential element for life, preserving. But what is remarkable with this lady is that she is doing scuba diving, and she explored 70 kilometers of the Saint Laurent River surrounding Montreal Island. What she found and filmed deep under the water was shown and commented by her during an interview she gave with Radio-Canada. What she described was quite a wake-up call based on what she found during her diving journey. I invite you to find this video and watch it. During the interview, I learned a few things. First, I did not know that 80% of the tap water in Montreal come from the Saint Laurent River. The water from the Saint Laurent River was filtered and treated before it was sent to the residential houses. Nathalie said people must learn to use the tap water parsimoniously because it is very expensive to treat it. She gave an example about how Montrealers brush their teeth. Several liters of water wasted during the teeth brushing. And she said, multiply this wasted tap water by 1.7 million of persons living in Montreal twice a day, should give you an idea of how tap water was wasted for teeth brushing. My next one. This picture show you some polar bears suffering from the impact of climate change. Polar bears are, for me, a very powerful symbol of the strength and endurance of the Arctic. At least 2/3 of the world's polar bears live in Canadian territory. Giving Canadians a special responsibility for these bears, the polar bears spend much of its life in, around, and on the ocean, predominantly on the sea ice, as you can see. The polar bear's future is very, very tightly linked to the sea ice habitat. As climate change continues to reduce the thickness of the sea ice, the future of polar bears and their habitat are at risk. Sea ice is essential habitat for their primary food. Here you can see the seals, as the seal pup there and rest on the ice, caught by one mama bear. Let's go to the next slide. And one important concern that we should also learn to know is that the permafrost on the Canadian territory and soil temperature in many areas are rising as a result of climate change. We all know that. And as temperatures rise, the permafrost layer melts and becomes thinner, and in some cases may completely evaporate. When permafrost melts, methane, CH4, and carbon dioxide stored in the soil are released into the atmosphere, because methane and carbon dioxide are greenhouse gases. Melting permafrost helps perpetuate the climate warming, what I call this cycling process that caused it in the first place. So it's something we should be very concerned. And it's not only Canada, it's all over the world, in the northern part, like in Russia, Siberia. And I go further, I look into the IPCC report this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's the term for the IPCC. And this panel is the body of the United Nations. They assess the science related to climate change, and they produce a report every year. So this year you can see a few facts that I collect here. First of all, if the sea level, even with 2 degrees of the Earth temperature increase, it will rise about 50 centimeters by 2100. So only with 2 degrees, we still have 50 centimeters. There are 1,700 billion tons of carbon dioxide embedded in the permafrost, which is the equivalent of the double of the CO2 level that we are currently have in the atmosphere. The Amazon forest absorbs about 450 billion tons of carbon dioxide. But due to the deforestation, bushfire, and exploitation, it could release back to the atmosphere. And people say about 20% of its carbon dioxide content. And one interesting statement was, we can help reducing the global warming by changing our lifestyle. So let's go to the next slide. This one is a very special one. I learned recently that Mr. Syukuro Manabe, he still is a professor at Princeton University, and he received this year a Nobel Prize in Physics. And he's a Japanese educated, but he becomes American around the 1958. And then he joined the Princeton research group on climatology and meteorology. He was the first one to demonstrate the impact of carbon dioxide on the Earth's temperature due to sunlight. He published his mathematical prediction model in 1966, and in 1988 he appeared at the U.S. congressional hearings about the possibility of climate change. But all of his petitions, wake-up calls, and publications seem to go into deaf ears. Today, modern and sophisticated simulation models all confirm Manabe model. So moreover, recently the 30-year satellite survey of the what they call polar mesosphere corroborate Manabe's findings. And the Stockholm Scientific Council decided to award him with the Nobel Prize in Physics in December this year for his work on predicting climate change. So now we know that sunlight and carbon dioxide interact and rising the temperature of the atmosphere. So I found two video, one by Dr. Lilian Chung. Lilian Chung is now, I think she's still head of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard University. And she wrote a book together with Thầy on, the title is Savor, and in which she gave the details of how the food are made of and how do we learn to consume the right way for our health and so on. And she also provides 7 practices of mindful eating that I will show you at the end of this talk. And also, Thầy wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet that our brother André Vellino had given a presentation, I think 2 weeks ago. And he gave the first part of what he read, which is quite interesting. But you can also watch a video recently put onto YouTube by the Joyful Garden Sangha, Singapore Plum Village, entitled A Practice with Sister True Dedication. I watched it totally 1 hour and a half, and I found it so good, with all questions and answers. And I hope you will enjoy it when you have time to open it. Let's go to the next one. So let's move up to a second higher food we call the sense impressions. The sense impression come when our 6 sense organs are in touch with the object, external object and also internal object, the sight, the sound, the smell, the taste, the object of touch, and the thoughts being sensed by the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and our mind, and giving rise to 6 elements of consciousness in our mental, in our mind. And I would like to remind you that when we have such a contact, our 5 universal mental formations usually work all together. The contact brings about attention. For example, when I went to downtown, let's say the Rideau Center, and I passed in front of boutique, and I saw a beautiful winter coat. The winter coat caught my attention, and suddenly I have a feeling that wearing this winter coat will give me warmth. I will feel so happy in that winter coat. So I developed some kind of perception that I will be well and I will look so cool with that winter coat. But I resisted. I don't have money enough to buy that, and so I just forget it. 3 weeks later, I went back and passed in front of the same boutique, and I saw the same winter coat there with some reduction discount on the price. And ta-da! The whole thing pushed me to take an action. I bought it. And that is called volitional action. So you see how sense impressions can have a very important impact into our action and thinking. So here I give you an example that most of our, our monastic people used to give is the poem written by Cui Hu. In Vietnamese, Cui Hu is known as Thôi Ho. This is during the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty is a dynasty during which Buddhism flourished, booming as a beautiful flower on the Chinese soil. You remember Master Xuan Chang, in Vietnamese Huyền Trang. He went to study in India for 4 years at the Nalanda University. It's also during the 7th century. And they also built a giant Buddha statue in Leshan. The statue was carved in rock, and it measures 73 meters high, something like 50 meters wide, and enormous. You can see on the picture how small are the people who went to look at this statue. So Cui Hu is he was a student, and he went to the capital of China at that time to it's called Chang'an to do an exam. When you succeed in those exams, you become what they call at that time the officers of the king. But for the first exam he wrote, he failed. So on the way home, he stopped at a farm to look to ask for some water because he was very thirsty. So a beautiful lady, the daughter of the farmer, came out and gave him water. Sense impression, he was completely dizzy. She was so beautiful, and he went home having what kind of, I call the love sickness. He fell in love just by seeing her for the first time. So the year after, he came back to do the exam, and on the way there, volitional actions, he couldn't resist himself to go to the farm to ask for water again. But the beautiful lady was absent. So he was so disappointed. He wrote a poem and he put that on the door. The poem says, "Last year, today at this place, peach blossoms reflect pink glow on her face. Now the fair face is nowhere to find, while peach blossoms continue to smile in spring breeze as always." And this poem becomes famous in Asia. When I was young, I learned the tale of Kiều during my high school. My teacher also talked about this poem that the Vietnamese Nguyễn Du, the one who wrote the tale of Kiều, also follow this example, and I would say copy a little bit of this story into the tales of Kiều. So the poem becomes so famous. But then the lady, when she come back, she saw the poem and she fell sick, and she was really on the way to die there. So the farmers sent people to look for this student and to bring him to his farm. So when the student arrived, the body of the lady is still warm, but he was so suffering, and he cried, and the warm tears fell onto the lady's body, and she woke up. So they both hugged each other, and according to the legend, they later get married and become husband and wife, and they live happily since. Let's go to the next one. So volition, all I can say is it's an act by which the will is aiming at making something happen. In other words, it refers to the culmination of a process by which the human being effects the will. It is the event by which the individual puts himself in the position to act in order to have an outcome, internal or external. In everyday language, it could be understood as the making of a choice leading to some actions. So that is volition. So we just saw how the 5 universal mental formation work. Contact brings about attention, give rise to feeling and perception, pushing us to finally commit some actions. So that is the third food. And for the fourth food, I will go into the 3 consciousness called mind consciousness, defined consciousness, and store consciousness. But we will not have enough time to develop and to go deeply into those last food. So I just give you the next slide where I will read the 3 tenets composed by Thầy. But I hope we will have another session where we can go deeply into this fourth food. So the first one, 34, Thầy wrote 40 tenets. You can find it on the Plum Village website. 34 say, store consciousness has the capacity of learning, storing, protecting, responding, nourishing, healing, and continuing. Its function is to establish a database and unconscious habits of responding to situations, which makes it possible for human beings to act on autopilot. So this store consciousness for me, I compare that to the hard disk of your laptop. And manas has a tendency to seek for security and long-lasting pleasure. It is ignorant of the law of moderation, the danger of pleasure seeking, and the goodness of suffering. It does not see the necessity for insight into impermanence, non-self, interbeing, compassion, and communication. So manas is definitely one of our concerns. If we practice, we should be able to overcome or to bypass or to get rid of this, define consciousness. So this is what I say on the 36th tenet. With the practice of mindfulness, concentration, and insight, my consciousness can learn and download its insight to store consciousness and leave store consciousness to do the work of maturation and then manifest the seed of wisdom that are already innate in store consciousness. So with that, I go to the next slide where you will see the curtain closing down my talk, or closing up, with a beautiful picture I took when I was in Africa, and the country is Guinea Equilateral, or Equatorial, Guinea Equatorial. This is on the, at the middle of the earth. Beautiful sunset. So we hope that we will consume in such a way to preserve our beautiful planet Earth. With that, I present you my deep bow for your listening, and I will close it off here. So let me stop the sharing.